I saw her there, a few meters away, smiling and leaning towards him in an almost natural way, as if that meeting wasn't a violation of everything we'd built together. My eyes froze on the scene, her laughing, her touch on his arm, the familiarity with which her fingers slid across his skin, and him, confident, too comfortable next to her. For a second, I wondered if I was the only one there who saw the absurdity. I wondered if it was really possible for this to be happening before my eyes, without shame, without guilt. The party was packed, but it was as if everyone had disappeared. I was trapped in that scene, seeing what had previously seemed impossible. The promises of eternal love, the trust that I thought was solid, the complicity that seemed unbreakable. Everything seemed to disintegrate in that instant, everything seemed fragile and false. Amid the noise of laughter and conversations, I heard his voice like a distant echo. She told her lover, he'll never know. Those words echoed through my mind, a cold, calculating sentence that cut through the air, making the simple act of breathing impossible. I approached, my heart racing, my thoughts confused between anger and disbelief. She saw me, and her smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of surprise and fear. Please don't divorce me. This was all a misunderstanding, she begged, her voice shaking, trying desperately to control the situation. But how to explain the inexplicable? How to defend the indefensible? It was then that I realized that the betrayal went far beyond what I had just witnessed. I started to put the pieces together, to understand that there was more than just a case. There was a web of lies, a web of manipulation that involved more than I could imagine. Someone close to me, someone I trusted blindly, knew. And, even worse, she covered everything up, supporting her lies, manipulating my perception, making me believe in a reality that never existed. It was someone who was always by my side, someone to whom I trusted my secrets and my fears, someone who I would never have imagined being capable of such betrayal. And now, at that very moment, as she begged for forgiveness, I knew there was something darker and deeper hidden there, something that only time would reveal. Welcome to our channel, where we believe that betrayal is never justified. Here, we bring fictional stories that show, in an intense and realistic way, how betrayal can destroy lives, tear apart trust and turn dreams into nightmares. Get ready, because what you're going to hear now is a shocking narrative, full of twists and turns, that will keep your attention until the end. Good story, and remember, the truth always comes out. On a summer night, the lights in Alexander and Hannah's spacious home shine brightly, reflecting the life they've built together over the past 15 years. Living in a city full of possibilities, they had become the couple that many admired, balancing promising careers, a united family and a solid network of friends. Alexander was the kind of man whose dedication went beyond what many would consider standard. A respected lawyer, his sharp analytical skills and patience made him stand out in the legal field. Hannah, with a charming presence, worked in the administration of an art gallery, which placed her in a distinct social circle, surrounded by artists, collectors and a public eager for culture and news. She was the type of woman whose energy and natural charm transformed the places she was in. Despite their long work hours, Alexander and Hannah maintained small rituals that strengthened their bond. Dinners on the weekends, family outings, small trips for two. However, as the years went by, busy schedules and everyday exhaustion began to wear away at these precious moments. Alexander, always detail-oriented and meticulous, noticed the change in routines, but ignored it, attributing it to the daily rush and Hannah's dedication to her growing career at the gallery. He had convinced himself that these small distances were inevitable, something natural over time. On that particular night, while Alexander finished reviewing an important case in his home office, Hannah was preparing for an important exhibition at the gallery. The event would bring together a series of important names, renowned artists and critics from the city. The responsibility that weighed on her shoulders was great, and she wanted to impress both the guests and her boss, who had great confidence in her work. Alexander saw how her eyes lit up when she talked about the event, and, even though he knew they would spend another night apart, he encouraged her, respecting her passion for what she did. "You're going to rock," Hannah," he said, watching the way she chose her accessories and touched up her makeup in front of the mirror. She smiled at him, that smile that had once completely won him over. "Thank you, Alex. I just want everything to be perfect," he replied, giving him a quick kiss before leaving. As she walked away, Alexander felt a small void that he soon tried to fill with work. He knew Hannah was dedicated to her success at the gallery, and he was secretly proud of her. Even though her commitments grew more and more, he believed that the love between them remained solid, an unbreakable connection built over years of challenges and achievements. Hannah, on the other hand, felt like she was in a whirlwind of emotions. His professional growth was a source of great achievement, but at the same time, it brought an unexpected dose of restlessness. The pressure to live up to expectations was constant, and the fine line between success and exhaustion was fragile. In the gallery, she became a reference of elegance and good taste, which attracted both admiration and greed. The compliments on her appearance, the way she handled her work, the way she knew how to engage guests, everything made her feel wanted and special, feelings that, at times, she feared losing. Hannah was ambitious, but also vulnerable to the attention she received, the approval of those who admired her work, and sometimes herself. While Hannah dedicated herself to organizing the event, Alexander continued his routine. In his free time, he ran in the city park, taking the opportunity to reflect and relieve the stress of work. It was during these runs that he pondered about his life, the small changes in his marriage, the times when he felt the need for a little more attention and affection from Hannah, but he soon pushed these thoughts aside, believing that they were the result of his own insecurity. Over the next few weeks, events at the gallery became more frequent, and Alexander found himself increasingly alone. He spent most of his time with coworkers or a few friends who were in regular contact, but the emptiness he felt was hard to ignore. It was as if something in the routine had lost its shine, its rhythm and, above all, its warmth. Little by little, he began to realize that those simple moments they had together, the conversations about the day, the shared laughter, were becoming rare. One afternoon, during an office meeting, Alexander received a message from a longtime friend, Matthew. She was someone he trusted completely, a friend with whom he shared confidences and outbursts, the type of person who knew behind the scenes of someone's life. Matthew invited him to a casual outing, a weekend social event that promised to be relaxed and enjoyable. Alexander, always reserved, hesitated, but, encouraged by his friend, ended up accepting. He needed something to get him out of that lonely routine. Arriving at the event, Alexander was greeted by the warmth of those around him, a welcome distraction. He let himself be enveloped by the light and cheerful atmosphere, where he chatted with old friends and even met some new people. However, Matthew's presence brought something more. Lately, Matthew had been noticing Alexander's lack of enthusiasm, and, as a good friend, he wanted to see his smile again. He encouraged Alexander to be less hard on himself, to explore new horizons, and to remember that there was more to life than the routine of work and home. "You need to relax a little, Alex," Matthew would say, patting him on the back. "You have to stop worrying so much about work. Hannah is fine, the gallery is going strong, and you should indulge in some fun." Alexander smiled at the advice, but he couldn't help but feel that something was bothering him deeply, like an uneasiness that he still couldn't define. The days that followed were a real test of patience for Alexander. The gallery had signed a new partnership agreement with a major investor, and Hannah spent her evenings attending business meetings and dinners. Her behavior worried him, she seemed so distant, caught up in a world from which he felt excluded. When I asked about work, she responded vaguely, as if her mind was always somewhere else. And Alexander, more and more, found himself trying to fill the void of that absence. One night, he decided to surprise her. He prepared her favorite dinner, set the table with candles and waited for her to arrive. When he finally showed up, late at night, Hannah looked exhausted. She smiled at the surprise, but the tiredness on her face was evident. "I know I've been absent, Alex. I'm sorry, but things are crazy at work," she explained, as he watched her, trying to read beyond the words. "Everything is fine. I just wish we had more time for ourselves," he replied, as she looked away, apparently impatient. Despite the tense atmosphere, they had dinner together, and Alexander felt, for the first time in a long time, a closeness he feared he had lost. However, at the end of the night, Hannah's expression seemed distant, and she went to bed early, leaving him once again with the bitter taste of loneliness. That feeling of loss hit him with a force he didn't want to admit. Even with all the justifications he found, the pain of Hannah's absence and change in behavior always seemed to remind him that something wasn't right. He was beginning to fear that what once united them was slowly falling apart, turning their marriage into a shadow of what it once was. Meetings with Matthew became more frequent, and Alexander felt grateful to have someone to talk to, someone who listened to his outbursts and encouraged him to remain calm. Matthew had always been a loyal friend, someone he saw as a brother, and that brought a relief, a sense of security amid the confusion that Alexander's married life was becoming. Even so, he couldn't stop his heavy heart from filling with doubts and fears. The lonely nights, the days of hard work and the growing distance between him and Hannah formed a web of thoughts that slowly consumed him. And as Matthew, with words of encouragement, reminded him to move forward and be patient, Alexander found himself increasingly torn between the desire to keep his marriage intact and the distrust that seemed to grow silently but relentlessly in his heart. He wondered how much he could bear this situation and how committed Hannah was to them. What was, after all, stronger, the love that had brought them together or the subtle changes that, little by little, threatened to distance them? The weeks became a long succession of lonely nights and cold messages exchanged between Alexander and Hannah. Her work, which had always been a source of pride for him, was now a source of increasing discomfort. Hannah was increasingly absent, more evasive, and the excuses were repeated: "The gallery is expanding, investors demand a lot, it's a new beginning." Alexander struggled to believe it, but her forced smiles, quick responses, and presence became a burden he bore in silence. On a rainy afternoon, Alexander met Matthew at a bar near the office. His friend already knew him well enough to notice the tension on his face, even if Alexander tried to hide it. "Are you okay?" Matthew asked, his expression full of concern. Alexander looked away, hesitantly, and after a long sigh, decided to expose his concern. "Something has changed between us," he began, struggling to find the exact words. "It feels like we're no longer connected, like something is pulling us apart." Matthew nodded, keeping a serious look. "Maybe it's the work, Alex. You know how it is, the pressure, the expectations. People change under that kind of pressure." Alexander considered the answer, but something inside him refused that explanation. The discomfort, the doubt, was deeper, darker. He felt like something was hidden, something he couldn't name, but it haunted him more and more. From that conversation on, Alexander became more attentive to details. He began to observe Hannah's every gesture, every word, as if he was looking for signs of something that, deep down, he already feared. On one of those nights, while reviewing documents in the office, he found an invitation to a gallery event. He knew Hannah had mentioned the event, but he hadn't been invited. Determined, Alexander decided to show up by surprise, justifying to himself that it was an opportunity to see his wife in action, but, deep down, he wanted to understand what kept her so distant. Upon arriving, he noticed how comfortable Hannah was in that environment. He talked to artists and investors, circulated through groups with grace and confidence. He approached slowly, trying not to attract attention, and watched her from afar. There was something magnetic about her presence there, as if the space around her was shaped by the energy she emanated. However, at one point, he noticed a man approaching Hannah, someone he didn't know. The man lightly touched her arm, an intimacy that Alexander didn't recognize. He forced himself to look away, trying to shake off the thoughts that were beginning to form. But the scene repeated itself a few more times throughout the night, and Alexander began to feel like an intruder in a life that, apparently, he was no longer a part of. With every gesture, every smile directed at that man, he felt his stomach turn, distrust growing at an almost uncontrollable pace. Later, when he returned home, he confronted Hannah, trying to express his distress without sounding accusatory. She listened to him with a closed expression, keeping her gaze firm but defensive. "You're exaggerating, Alex. It's just work. This project demands a lot from me, and I cannot afford to ignore these contacts," she said, walking away and ending the conversation abruptly. But the seed of distrust had been planted, and Alexander, determined to discover the truth, began to observe every detail. He avoided expressing his suspicions so as not to generate unnecessary confrontations, but internally, a battle was raging. He wanted to trust, he wanted to believe that it was all just his own insecurity. But the signs continued, small gestures and expressions that, for him, only confirmed the worst-case scenario. One weekend, Hannah announced that she would need to travel for work, a meeting with a potential investor in another city. Alexander offered her company, but she quickly declined, claiming that the meeting would be short and that he would probably be bored. The answer increased his suspicions, but he accepted it, preferring to remain calm and observe. After the weekend, Matthew suggested that Alexander try to relax by going out to a party thrown by a mutual friend. It would be a chance to clear your mind, forget your problems for a few hours. Alexander, worn out by the accumulated tension, accepted. The party was full, and he tried to distract himself, but the image of Hannah and that man in the gallery wouldn't leave his mind. It was in an unassuming moment, when looking across the room, that he saw her. Hannah was there, with the same man, in a private corner, laughing and talking with an intimacy that took her breath away. She was supposed to be returning from a trip, and that meeting didn't make sense. Alexander's heart raced, confusion and anger took him by storm. Without thinking, he approached, his steps firm, his gaze fixed, as if everything around him had disappeared. Upon noticing his presence, Hannah stopped, her expression quickly changing from surprise to fear. "Alex, what are you doing here?" Her voice shook slightly as she tried to maintain her composure. Alexander, now in front of her, stared at her in silence, trying to absorb the betrayal that was revealed without the need for words. He wanted to scream, demand explanations, but the weight of reality stopped him. The man next to her discreetly walked away, realizing the discomfort of the situation. Hannah, however, stood still, without reacting. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice barely audible, the words coming out in disarray. "Please, you don't understand." Alexander felt his chest tighten, the pain and shock blocking any response. He turned and left, the sounds of the party becoming distant as his mind tried to process what he had just witnessed. Back home, he was faced with an emptiness he had never felt before. The image of her next to her lover, the whispers, the gestures, everything swirled in his mind, crushing him with a dull pain. Betrayal, naked and raw, turned every memory, every shared moment, into a farce. He sat, eyes fixed on nothing, and felt the world crumble around him. Hannah returned some time later, trying an explanation that sounded empty, as if words couldn't erase what he had seen. "Please, Alex, you don't know everything," she said, her voice breaking, her eyes pleading. But he, firmly, refused to listen to any justification. For him, the truth was there, clear, unbearable. What Alexander didn't know was that betrayal was just the surface of something even deeper, something that would upend his certainties even more, that would put into question not only his marriage, but also the people he considered faithful and loyal. Alexander spent the night awake, every thought taking him back to the scene he had witnessed at the party. The heavy silence of the house seemed to amplify the pain he felt, the emptiness where there had once been trust. On impulse, he picked up the phone and dialed Matthew's number, feeling an urgency to vent to the only friend he still trusted. Shortly afterwards, Matthew appeared, his face marked with concern. Alexander, trying to maintain his composure, described what he had witnessed, every detail making the betrayal all the more real. Matthew listened silently, nodding, until Alexander's voice broke. "I don't know who to trust anymore. Even you seem like a stranger now." Matthew hesitated, looking away before answering. Alex, I never wanted you to know like this. He began, the words sounding heavy and hesitant. The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander frowned, suspicion intensifying, feeling that something bigger was behind that hesitation. He kept his gaze fixed on his friend, wordlessly demanding that he continue. I heard about her, Alex, Matthew said finally, his voice thick with obvious guilt. I knew a while ago. I was actually the one who introduced you to him. Alexander blinked, as if he had been punched. What? He almost whispered, unable to believe what he had just heard. Did you know? And you didn't tell me anything? Matthew looked down, his expression transformed with shame. It wasn't as simple as it seems. I thought you'd never find out. Hannah was dissatisfied, and I thought a little adventure would do her good and keep her from ending everything between you. I was trying to protect you, Alex, in some way from what she wanted. I just wanted to keep her from leaving you. Fury exploded inside Alexander, and he stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. You thought you were helping me? His voice shook, full of disbelief. Did you decide on your own that it was better to lie to me? What kind of friend does that? Matthew backed away, the words stuck in his throat. I just wanted to keep you from getting hurt, Alex. I thought it was a solution, a way to keep you together without you having to deal with the truth. Deal with the truth? Alexander let out a bitter laugh. The truth is that you betrayed me as much as she did. I trusted you, Matthew. I trusted you more than anyone else. And now you tell me that you were complicit in this lie. Matthew took a deep breath, trying to find words to justify the unjustifiable. I made a mistake, Alex. I thought it was for the best, that it was something temporary. But now I see. I see how wrong it was. Just listen to me. Alexander remained silent, his eyes fixed on his friend, who was visibly shaken. It was as if Matthew's every word ripped the wound even deeper. He shook his head, trying to understand the weight of that revelation. You destroyed everything, Matthew. Everything, Alexander whispered, his eyes filling with overwhelming sadness. For a moment, the room was immersed in a charged silence. They both knew that any explanation would sound empty, that there were no words that could repair the damage. Matthew's presence there, standing before him with a look of regret, turned Alexander's house into an even more suffocating environment. Every corner of that place that had once been a haven of comfort and trust now seemed crammed with empty memories, with lies intertwined with sweet words and false promises. Alexander felt like everything he knew was slipping through his fingers, leaving in its place only a heavy, bitter loneliness. Matthew took a tentative step towards Alexander, but the cold, determined look he received made him stop. I know I let you down. You have no excuse for what I did, Alex. There's no way to justify it. His voice was shaky, but filled with a sincerity that, at another time, Alexander might have believed. But now, his words sounded weak, unable to penetrate the wall of distrust that rose between them. Apologies don't change anything, Matthew, Alexander replied, his voice low and bitter. You destroyed my confidence, turned everything I believed in into nothing. And worse, you left me here, alone, trying to understand why, at some point, I thought I could trust you more than anyone. Alexander closed his eyes, trying to shake off the suffocating feeling that was squeezing his chest. He was faced with a dilemma he never imagined he would face, how to move forward knowing that the two people he trusted most had come together to hide the truth from him. Hannah entered the room, her eyes red, clearly aware of the gravity of the situation. She dared not approach, the shame and regret made it impossible for her to hold her gaze. But Alexander felt her presence like an unbearable weight, a constant reminder of everything that had been destroyed. Alex, she began, but her voice trailed off, and the silence that followed was even more painful. Alexander looked away, unable to look at Hannah's expression without feeling a wave of anger and sadness consume him. She took a tentative step towards him as if seeking an opportunity to explain the inexplicable. "I was wrong, Alex," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I know nothing I say can fix what I did, but please listen to me." He remained silent, letting her feel the weight of his disappointment. The courage she had to approach soon faded, and the space between them seemed to grow, a distance that could not be bridged with apology or regret. Alexander wanted to understand what had led her to betray him so deeply, but at the same time, he no longer wanted to hear words that he knew were incapable of erasing the pain he felt. "I don't know if I can hear you, Hannah," he replied, his voice breaking. "Everything you say now seems empty. How can I trust anything that comes from you?" Matthew, who until then had remained silent, interrupted, trying to regain some dignity amidst the chaos. "Alex, I was part of this. I encouraged. Not just for her, but because she thought she was protecting you from something you couldn't face." He stopped, trying to find the right words, but everything seemed insufficient. "And it was a mistake. A mistake I can never correct." Alexander felt the weight of Matthew's words like a blow, each one enlarging the wound spreading in his chest. He looked at his friend, at his wife, and realized he was at a point of no return. These were the faces of the people he had loved, trusted, but now, all he saw in them was a bitter reminder of a life that had been built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. The decision facing Alexander was immense, but he knew he needed to take a stand. There was no way to continue in that cycle of betrayal, of secrets, of false complicity. He took a deep breath, gathering the strength to do what was necessary, even if it left him even more alone than before. "You two got what you wanted," he said, his voice cold, determined. "They constructed this lie, this story, and turned it into a reality that I was not part of. I no longer want to try to understand the reasons, the justifications. I just want this to end." Hannah tried to get closer again, her face racked with guilt. "Alex, please, it doesn't end like this. Don't leave us like this. I know I made a mistake, I know I hurt you, but we can start over." He looked away, unable to bear the pleading in her eyes. "Start over? After all this? After seeing what our marriage has turned into?" He shook his head firmly. "You made a choice, Hannah. You both did. And that choice has consequences." Matthew tried once again to intervene. "Alex, it doesn't have to be like this. I know what we did was horrible, but we've been friends for a long time. This cannot be the end." But Alexander knew that, for him, this was the end. There was no turning back, no more understanding, no more forgiveness that could restore the trust that had been broken. He looked at them both, pain transformed into cold determination. "You have already made your choices. Now, I'm doing mine." With those words, he turned, leaving the room, leaving Hannah and Matthew behind, both lost in a silence filled with regret. After weeks of absolute silence, Alexander finally found a new balance in his life. He moved to a small apartment far from the house where he lived with Hannah, and the divorce and property separation processes were ongoing, cold and formal, with no room for dialogue. The time away gave him the clarity he needed, the chance to calmly observe the open wounds, to accept reality. During this period, he reconnected with himself, with the simple moments that he had previously left behind amidst the rush and disappointments. Hannah, on the other hand, seemed paralyzed. She continued to live in the same house, surrounded by memories that reminded her daily of everything she had lost. In that empty house, every room, every detail brought him the cold reality of his choices. She felt the weight of a loneliness she had never experienced before, a guilt that silently consumed her. She had tried to write letters to Alexander, left messages, but they had all gone unanswered. Still, she clung to the hope that he might eventually hear her apology. Matthew, the friend who had been the silent accomplice, faced a burden of his own. His friends and acquaintances, little by little, discovered his participation in the betrayal. He became the target of suspicious looks and indirect accusations. That network of trust, once so solid, began to dissolve around him. The work environment became hostile, colleagues he had lived with for years began to keep their distance, judging him in silence. The life he thought he controlled was slipping out of his hands relentlessly. One day, Alexander received one last letter from Hannah. She had personally delivered it to his lawyer, insisting that it be read. At first, he hesitated, but after a long walk, he decided to open the envelope, more out of curiosity than hope. On paper, she described the pain she felt, the regret, and asked for a single meeting, not to ask for forgiveness, but to end what was left between them once and for all. After reflecting, Alexander agreed to meet her in a quiet cafe, away from everything. When she arrived, he almost didn't recognize her. The vivacity and confidence from before had given way to a haggard, restrained look. The initial silence between the two was dense, filled with everything they had experienced together and everything they had lost. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Alex," she began, her voice low and cautious. "I just want you to know that I regret everything. Not from what we had, but from what I threw away. Of everything I missed." Alexander listened attentively, absorbing her words like someone analyzing a story from the outside. He no longer felt anger, just a detachment that gave him serenity. "Hannah, there is nothing that can change what happened. And what I want now is peace. Something that, honestly, I can only achieve away from you." She nodded, holding back tears, understanding that this was the true end. With a silent wave, the two said goodbye. That would be the last memory Alexander would keep of her, a sad but serene memory, the closure needed to move on. After the separation, Alexander dedicated himself to rebuilding his life with new purposes. He reconnected with old friends, resumed hobbies and invested in activities that brought him peace and joy. The process was slow, but each step gave him a new understanding of himself, a strength he had lost over the years. It was not a victory, but a rebirth. And, over time, he began to remember the past without pain, but with a mature understanding of the lessons he had left behind. Matthew, on the other hand, did not find this peace. He found himself isolated, trapped in his own choice to betray his friend's trust. The weight of his actions had become a burden that separated him from everything that was once important to him. He tried to reconnect with other people, but no one seemed willing to trust someone who had betrayed such a close friend. His reputation, built over so many years, was ruined in a matter of days. The looks of others always reminded him of the mistake he could never erase. Over time, Alexander found someone who reminded him of what true companionship was like, someone with whom he could build a new story, without rushing, but with sincerity. He learned to value every moment, every gesture, aware that trust was a treasure that needed to be protected. Alexander's story is a reminder that betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it changes lives forever, leaving marks that time can't always erase. He moved on, but always with the certainty that, in life, the truth is the only solid basis for any relationship. And you, what did you think of this story? Leave your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. We remember that here, betrayal is not tolerated. Our goal is to show how disloyalty can destroy lives and the importance of trust in any relationship.